Hello and welcome, everybody. So my name is Stephen Fortuna, and this is the show where we bring together experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in HR. And we have with us three amazing experts today who are going to talk to us about Boomerang employees. So we've got Heather Anderson, who's an HR manager at SP Plus. We've got Phil Rong, who's the founder and chief human capital consultant at Elite HR. And last but not least, we have Sam Eaton, who is the founder at Mindability Consulting. So happy to have the three of you with us today to talk about a very interesting, sometimes controversial topic, Boomerang employees. We're going to get into all of it, but I want to first address the definition, because I think there might be a couple people who are watching this who will think, maybe they have kind of a funny image in their mind. What is a Boomerang employee? Are they throwing a boomerang? What are they doing with boomerangs? Are they the boomerang? Phil, enlighten us. What is a Boomerang employee?
Well, I think the image of the boomerang being thrown is pretty good, because it's the employee that leaves your organization and then circles back and tries to or is rehired back in your organization. So they've boomerang, thought the grass is greener, realized it might not have been, and came right back.
Awesome. Okay. We're all straight on the definition now. Let's jump into the kind of opinions and thoughts on this. And I want to kind of do something a little bit different. Rehiring Boomerang employees. There are positive opinions, negative opinions, and some people kind of have a neutral opinion on this. I want each of you, just with your thumb, to show on the count of 3. Do you think hiring Boomerang employees is thumbs up, thumbs down, or something in between? And everyone good? I'll let you form your opinions real quick. All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. Interesting. Let's hop to Sam first, because she used 2 thumbs, which wasn't cheating, but was very clever. She gave it a neutral and a plus. Sam, why are you a little bit positive on Boomerang employees?
I've seen it work really well. Let's face it, we've seen famous people that we all know. Steve Jobs, Jack Dorsey. It worked exceptionally well, right? So they came back. The period of time in which they came back is a lot longer than the average now. But they brought expertise, they brought fresh insight, and they knew the institutions that they were going back to exceptionally well. The middle thumb is obviously people coming back with you've got the unfinished business, you've got how your co-workers are going to think about it, you've got this is how we used to do it mentality. And all of that needs to be dealt with before they even come back. And their noses may well be put out of joint because they're still going back through a new recruitment process, which they need to be, my opinion.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. They need to go through the recruitment process, learn the culture. And if they're boomeranging back just to get a big salary jump, then that to me is one of the tremendous negatives. And I think that gives it a really bad neutral to negative feel, because it's just they left for more money and then they're coming back for more money, and they're not really bringing much skill set or new skill set with them.
Nice. Heather, tell us about your thumb.
So I did a middle because I was one. I actually worked at a company and left for about 10 years and then came back, but in a different capacity. I was a frontline employee, a frontline supervisor, and then when I came back, I ended up being their HR department. So, I have seen things like that absolutely work. But I also work in industries that are 24/7, 365 in person. And you see a lot of people leave for higher pay or whatever it may be that they leave for, realize that it's not the greatest or it doesn't work out there because they just don't, for some reason, work out. and then they want to come back to what they feel is their safe spot. And there are absolutely those that feel like every company is their safe spot. And what is that really doing? Like, are you inviting, like, I know, especially with the, with the way that recruiting is, especially here in Utah, we're one of the lowest in the nations. Yeah, we do need people. We do need people. We need them in person. We need to be able to fulfill our, our obligations to our clients and to our customers. But at what cost? Are we literally just recruiting to have a body in the seat, and because they're willing to come back, we're like, okay? Or is it really creating a benefit for the company to bring them back? So it could go either way, depending on the person, how they left, how they worked when they were there, and really the whole situation.
Yeah. Well, the three of you have already brought up a bunch of nuances there. I think the fact that we got a lot of neutral on it means that there's going to be a lot of evaluation and thinking that needs to go into the decision. So let's get into kind of the finer details of this, and just start at the beginning of it. So let's say, Phil, we'll start with you. An application comes through from a former employee. What's your next move? What do you do? Do you treat them like everyone else? I know you mentioned they need to go through the recruitment process like everyone else, but what might be some differences or similarities?
Well, some of the similarities is I treat the application like I would any application. I first have to qualify for the job. If they're coming in and saying they're looking for the next level up or a stretch assignment or any sort of position that they're applying for, they have to first meet the requirement that we're going to put every candidate through to do that. The second step that I do is I start looking at not only their employment file and records just to kind of see, but I then start asking if their coworkers or supervisors were there, try to find some of the unwritten down notes or comments or things that were said about them. Were they the saboteur? Were they the challenger? Were they the one bringing fresh ideas in? Were they the individual who a lot of people like to rally around? Kind of figure out, get a sense of who they are, and then why did they leave? I find that to be important. And is the reason they left fixed or different or going to be the same? And we're really just kind of creating a boomerang and another boomerang. So I kind of look at a few of those things before I would say this may be a good person to bring back in.
Yeah. Sam, what would you add or emphasize in Phil's response there?
I mean, I'm nodding in agreement. I agree with all of that. I think the other thing is, if what was their original thoughts in terms of the culture then and what's changed? Is it a people issue? And funnily enough, in preparation for tonight, one of the things I wrote down was if they had a problem with the CEO before, as an example, and that CEO's there, what's going to change?
Yeah. And how do you, and by the way, just to throw this back to you, Sam, how do you find that information? Do you just take the application around to the employees and say, hey, do you remember this person? What did you think? And you just kind of canvas the whole, department or whatever? Or is it written in notes, kind of like Phil was describing somewhere? What are your thoughts on that?
And again, I've given this one a lot of thought because it's such a fine line, right? Between digging, I'm not saying digging too deep, but the people you're talking to will have their own filters and opinions. And where does that come from? And their own biases. None of that is wrong, but it's about asking the right questions. How did they prioritize what was right in the organization, and how was it for them? And maybe asking questions slightly differently so the recipient doesn't feel they're in any kind of threatened position, and you get honest feedback rather than an opinion, because that's the risk over and above using the written materials, just as Phil said, which you need, taking the real data, but also then asking the questions. But as I said, asking them in such a way you're not getting opinion.
Yeah, smart. You're not just asking, did you like them?
Yeah.
I often find that when you get a Boomerang application, half of the people that the person worked with and knew already know that they've applied and will come to you. Did you hear that Sam has reapplied to come back to the company? And they'll just start telling you stuff. So if you just sometimes sit and listen, you'll just find out stuff because they just want to tell you.
Yeah. Heather, I want to bring you in here and talk a little bit more about the things you should be looking for when you see that application come through, and specifically on the red flags. Like, what would be an automatic disqualifier for bringing them back into the organization?
Their rehire status.
Tell us about
There's
that.
so when you've termed somebody or when they've left, even if they leave voluntarily, most companies have a process, and if your company doesn't, it could be something you have at a location, it could be something you have corporate. Um, is that person a good culture fit? Like, was them leaving on their own something that everyone went, oh, thank goodness? Or was it a sad thing? Like, were we sad to see them go? So when you see these names, and even like, especially when you're very first coming into a new company and you don't know them, ask the management, ask the supervisors, say, hey, I got an application from this person. They said they worked here from this time to this time. How was their performance? What do you recall on that? Are they rehireable? Check with your corporate officer, check with your senior leaders about that. And then just listen, see what they have to say. 'Cause sometimes if they're like, nope, unfortunately, they're not rehireable, then the conversation's over, right? I mean, there's nothing we can do at that point and we move on. Other things, like I work in a high safety sensitive function, is did we have any safety records that we might need to look through? Like, were they safe? Were they a potential liability? Like, maybe they just towed that line to where they weren't necessarily in trouble for it, but it was enough of a concern that we may not want to revisit that. Um, Big thing is culture fit. We've had employees, I've dealt with employees in the past where they've been gone only a couple months, but the environment has changed so much that, is this really going to be a place that they're going to be able to succeed? I've seen it to where people can come back, and the culture change and the change that's happened, they've thrived in it. It was exactly what they needed. Great, awesome. And other times where they've come in and they're like, it's so different. Like, I don't want to do this. And it's created more conflict than not. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration, especially like there is a huge difference between the supervisors and coworkers. Coworkers may love them, absolutely love them, but maybe their performance wasn't the stellest. Um, Maybe they had a lot of coachings or a lot of extra training they had to do, and were they accepting of that training? Because there are some people that will just struggle and they need a little bit of extra training, but they still work at it, right? They still bring that positive energy. They're constantly striving to improve. And are they wanting to come back in the same role? Maybe the role they were in just wasn't something they could succeed at, and they're wanting to try something different that really played to their strengths or not. Or are they applying for something that they don't have? Again, it comes back to what Phil said. Do they meet the qualifications of the role that they're applying for? So because you don't want to do anything that could potentially create or incite the biases, especially the unconscious biases. You want to make sure you're still treating them as equally as every other applicant. But you want to just be maybe a little extra thorough with identifying, was there any red flags before they left, or was there any red flags that you saw in their performance, like their performance reviews, how they dealt their interpersonal communication with their coworkers or with their management team, and are those going to be things that you feel like, either with or without training, would they create a conflict again? Because you don't want to bring negativity back into your work environment, when you're trying to build a culture of accountability and a culture of positivity and moving in a positive direction, just because you need a person, if that makes sense. So it is a very, very fine line. Like Sam said, it's very fine.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things that you guys are making me realize is you really have so much information around these Boomerang employees already that that you can take into account. And so in some way, I mean, just as you guys are talking about, I'm like, man, that's actually really stressful because you have so many data points. If you make the wrong decision to rehire them, you had all these things to say that it was the wrong decision or the right decision. But maybe it makes it easier in some cases too.
Well, and it could be that if you don't hit all the points and you're not doing things ethically or procedurally, like, Phil mentioned, it could potentially lead to, you know, discrimination lawsuits where they're like, I worked there before and they discriminated against me, or they did this or they did that. So even with Boomerang employees, you still have to follow those policies and procedures and treat them the same as you would any other applicant.
Yeah.
But maybe even in the interviews, you ask specific things to see, like, hey, here's where we were concerned about. So let's ask questions that can help give us insight as to if these issues have now changed or there's different insights to it, to help you make a better informed decision.
Yeah. And now let's continue with this kind of flyby on the whole recruiting process, because I think we've done a good job of like evaluating the application and if they should move forward. But Heather, you started to bring up the interviewing that needs to happen. Phil, what's your take on this? I mean, and then we'll go to Sam as well. How are the interviews different, or do you treat them exactly the same questions? Do they advance
I think
the final round right away or not?
I think it depends on what your interview process and procedure is. If you have a set standard amount of questions and that every interviewer asks, then you go through that process as you would for any other candidate. And so I think that's the case. But to Heather's point, you also want to take some deeper dives into what's motivating them to come back. What motivated you to leave, and talk about why that's either fixed or not fixed. Talk about the cultural changes that may have occurred in the time period in which they're out and how they feel about that. Describe sort of what their tasks, roles, and daily responsibilities are going to be, and make sure that there's a lot of clarity around that, so they know what's going to be coming into, and sort of express that while they're coming back and there'll be some familiarity, they are in some cases starting as if this is a new job day one. And set that stage for them so they don't walk in thinking, that, all right, I'm here, I'm back, I've been here for 5 years. No, you've been here for day one, in a lot of cases. So you've got to make that clear in the interview process so that when they if you do get hired and they do come back, that's very clear and they have a good understanding of that.
Yeah.
Especially with like seniority time, depending on how long it's been. Benefits, like what the process is. Like, is there a shortened onboarding process because it's only been X amount of time, or do they have to go through the full amount? What other loops do we need to walk through? And being very transparent with, yes, you were here for X amount of years, but because you've been gone X amount of time, you are starting over, or XYZ will roll over, and making sure there's very clear expectations there. Because we have, there have been times where employees have come in and said, well, no, I've been here for X amount of years. And it's like, well, no, you left for, this amount of time, and here you go. It's like, when I was at my other job, I was there for 2.5 years and then I left for 10 years. And then I came back. And even though the system said I'd been there since 2008, it's like, no, I haven't been here that long. Like, I've only been here for a little bit, and making sure that there is a clear definition so there's no miscommunication there or misunderstanding. That can cause a contention point.
Yeah, I know I would immediately boomerang back and be like, where are my extra PTO days? Like, give me this and that.
Yeah.
I would try to take advantage of that 100%. Just kidding. So we're starting to move into, I think, beyond like the hiring stage into you've decided to hire them, right? So Sam, I'd love to bring you in now around anything you want to share, but specifically on onboarding too. Do you feel like it needs to look a lot different? Kind of like what Phil was saying, like they are starting over, they're kind of day one. How might you address onboarding for a Boomerang employee?
Great question. And a lot of it will depend on how long it's been since they've gone and how that organization has changed, right? Because if you look at the stats are saying that Boomerang time has dropped from an average of 21 months down to 17 months. And I suspect that's going to continue to go down and down and down. In that case, how much has changed? But I also think part of that piece, from the recruitment piece to the onboarding, is actually asking that question, where do you want to go in your career? How can we help you achieve that? So you've got to really open conversation with them from day dot, from the get-go. We know exactly why they're coming back, exactly how this fits into their career, and therefore how we can best support them. So part of that onboarding can encompass that. There may be elements, therefore, that they don't need to go through, but they also shouldn't be treated differently because they're coming back. So therefore, the majority of the onboarding is very much still relevant for them, because our brains will forget whole segments of what's happening, right? So there might be bits. It's like when we learn to drive, and in the UK we have the Green Cross Code, and if you're naughty and you drive too fast, you then you either get your points off, or you go to a class for half a day and you have to refresh all the theory, and most of it and loads of it you forget. It's just the same when you're coming back to a company. It's no different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll build on that for a minute. I think it's important to also reset cultural expectations with the employee coming back. It's a good time for them to get the cultural refresher, even if not much has changed. And I look at it also as that's an opportunity to see how the employee is going to re-enter your workforce. Are they going to try to come in and be humble and learn and be ready to do the things again that make them successful? Or are they coming in like, hey, I'm back, look at me, I'm the rock star, and this gives you an opportunity from sort of day one to address any potential issues.
Yeah.
I think the onboarding should be the same for everybody, because you got to remember, they left and they went somewhere else. So for the past who knows how long, they've had another company's policies, procedures, rules, regulations slammed into their brain, and that's what that company's been training them to do. And it may not coincide with what your company does, regardless of what's changed or what's not. You may not have changed anything, and it's the same thing, but you want to still reiterate it so that it's fresh in their mind. It's no different than, the annual training that we all are required to do, or the retraining when there's an issue, especially if you're in a safety sensitive function. You still want to treat them as if they're brand new in those aspects to remind them this is what it is. And it may be a refresher for them. And you can preface that with, hey, you may already know all this, but we just want to be safe. We just want to make sure. But that way too, you have all that documentation in their file should something happen, to say, hey, we did train you when you came back. Because if you're like, oh, they've got it, it's fine, and then something happens and you don't have that documentation to prove that you have trained them or reiterated it with them or showed it to them again, then that's a liability on the company, not the employee.
Yeah.
So, you got to make sure that you're still hitting all of those, in certain aspects. You got to treat them the exact same as a brand new person coming in and remind them of what your company does, what the expectation is, and get those things done. And it may be a smaller skill gap, like it doesn't take them as long to pick it back up again, which is wonderful, but you still need to do it.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we got a good consensus here around onboarding, just the consistency, the importance of it, to just have it how it is for all the other employees. I kind of want to shift the mindset a little bit now to, up to this point, we've talked a lot about reacting to Boomerang employees, but I want to talk a little bit together on being proactive and reaching out to potential Boomerang employees. And Sam, I want to give you the first thought on this, and then maybe we could jump to Phil. But would you ever recommend that the recruiter, HR manager, whoever is actively reaching out to former employees to bring them back?
In certain instances. So, we're seeing more and more recruiters and organizations really taking their alumni seriously and keeping an eye on those and being proactive in those. So you've got more an awareness then as to where people are at. I think in the instances where, that person left on good terms, and it was very clear where they were going in their development, then that's absolutely fine to go back to them, because there's a clear reason why that person left. But if you're going back through the old employee list through sheer desperation, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? So there's clearly a problem with your culture to start with
Yeah.
That's what needs fixing before you bring old people back, and the whole thing is still going to go round in a vicious circle.
Great point. Phil, I'll let you, anything you want to add?
I've got nothing. I think Sam hit it on the head. I think it depends on the situation. It depends on the individual. It depends on the culture in the organization. If it's, if you're acting out of desperation, then that's always a bad sign. And, bringing back a boomerang employee just isn't going to make that better.
Yeah. I don't know why I just had this funny mental image of someone just going through their cell phone, or like ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends. Maybe there's desperation, maybe whatever. But yeah, that's I don't know, just a funny visual comparison. So not always great to reach out to former employees. Heather, anything you want to add on this? Do you, because I think ATSs, by the way, like there's very, Sam was starting to get into this, and we'll get into more of it in a second, but there are ways to stay in touch with your alumni network and engage them and bring them back. And it's a lot easier than it's ever been. But any other thoughts on just the pros and cons of being proactive on it?
I think it depends on the relationship that you built. I wasn't originally planning on going back to that company. It was a chance by some of the management team members that I ran into, and they just were like, "Oh my gosh, you would be perfect. You need to come talk to us. Like you should come back. This is what we're looking for." It ended up working out beautifully. But there are also times where, I've seen a director of operations just by the sheer loyalty that he has built with the relationship of these employees, when he's in a jam and he's like, "Hey, I've got special assignments, or I've just got this, or I've got these projects, or it's just a temp thing, can you please come back and help me?" Especially during like special events. He literally goes through his phone, and it's very similar to that, with like, "Hey, I need a favor. Hey, I need a favor. Hey, I need a favor." And he gets it done because of that's how he's built it. And sometimes they end up staying on longer, and other times they were like, "Cool, awesome. Call me back, next time when it happens. Thanks." It's not something they want to do all the time. So depending on the situation, it could be very beneficial. It's almost like you have your own personal temp agency that
Right.
you've got with your loyal people.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where if you have a role, and when you're going through that job description and the role and the tasks and the duties, and that person just pings in your brain, and you're like, "Yes, oh, they would be so good." Don't just reach out immediately. Pause for a minute, think about it, talk to your senior leaders about it, especially ones that this role would report to, and say, "What do you think? Like, this is great. This is awesome. I think they would just rock this out of the park, but are they going to be the best fit? Is it something that you just invite them to apply and have them go through the process if they're interested?" Because you got to remember, if they don't get picked, that could also damage that relationship that you have with them if you're looking at something later on down the road too.
Right.
So, you got to be mindful of a couple different things and really get some insight, because if they're, you're bringing somebody into interview for a role, just it's almost kind of like referrals a little bit, with like your name's on that and their name's on that, and is it going to work out? How's it going to affect the relationship? How's it going to affect the company? I mean, like, yeah, they may know the ins and outs, and they might do a really good job in that role, but are they going to be the best fit?
Yeah. Well, lots of great thoughts to keep in mind about how proactive to be on that. I think we've been well educated on that now. I know we're kind of venturing into sort of a different topic now, but I do want to lightly touch on it together and share any tips and ideas that we can. But we brought up the topic of alumni networks. You got to have this pool of former employees that are out doing great things, hopefully in other companies. What advice do you have for just staying engaged with them, and maybe one day, the right person will come back and it will just be natural and good? Phil, maybe you could start us off, and then Sam.
So I actually take a very different view on alumni networks, and I am a huge fan of them. But I think that if you have a really well-nurtured alumni network, you've now created like a mini sales force. People who know your company very well, who can be out there saying wonderful things about you. So I like to nurture them as you would any prospect, any client, any sort of relationship, because they're going to be out there and they could be potential opportunities. I mean, if you're a brand, let's say you make sneakers, and you have a brand manager who went to an agency, you have a potential relationship there that could be very beneficial to both parties. So nurturing that relationship can be, very good, if not to come back to your company, but for future work. And so the alumni networks can be great to have, great to nurture, and treat them like you would any other sales process.
Yeah. That's kind of sneaky, Phil. You're almost treating them like employees. Like, hey, you're going to this other company, but when you're at the sneaker factory, you're going to set us up. You're going to hook us up.
Well, yeah, you invite them back for drinks. You go to invite them
Yeah.
back for meals. You bring them back for events. You offer them training opportunities. You say, hey, we've got this great speaking coming. Do you want to come see them? And if you ever get send them copies of Shoe Dog. Things like that, so that you kind of nurture the relationship like you would a prospect.
Yeah, smart. Sam, what are your thoughts on alumni networks and the goals, maybe, and some of the tactics associated?
I love Phil's point, and just a similar perspective on that, but slightly different, is when any relationship changes, it's a little bit awkward, right? It doesn't matter how good the relationship is and you all part on good terms, there's change. And our brains are still a bit like, oh, how do I deal with that? So having these events, getting people back, staying in touch allows you to redress and refocus that. So there's that side about the Boomerang, which means that staying in touch, celebrating their change, supporting them in any ways through that alumni keeps you connected and allows you to shift that relationship. And more, particularly in a senior level these days, we're having partnerships, right? We're having peer level relationships, employer to employee. And that's really important to keep that engagement at that level. And let's not forget the most obvious one, LinkedIn. The fact as soon as LinkedIn brought that little feature in where we could ding people's bells, it's already in all of our vocab. Hey, I'm going to ding your bell. Sounds a little bit weird if you didn't know what was going on with it. But the power of that on top of great alumni allows us to stay connected and really know what's happening with people, and allows us to say, okay, out of all of these people who left in our carousel, there are about 50 or 60 that we really, really want to nurture and stay close to, right? And that allows us to do that.
Yeah. Great thoughts and insights. Man, well, we only have time really for one more big topic. So we'll get into that. And then we always give each of you at the end one last opportunity to just kind of share a final thought, any wisdom that you've been holding back from us throughout this conversation. So keep that in mind. But the final big topic I want to just discuss with each of you is now sort of shifting audiences a little bit. We've been talking HR professionals so far, but I know there's a lot of employees out there right now, and maybe some of them are HR professionals who are struggling with the fact that they thought the grass was greener on the other side. They left their company. There's been a lot of that in the past couple of years. And now they're looking back and saying, man, I really should have stayed. The culture was amazing. My supervisor, XYZ, I want to go back and I want to do it right and make a good impression. And I want that job. So let's talk to them for a second. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to just give any advice to that kind of a person. And let's start with you, Heather, and then we'll jump to Phil and then Sam.
I would say, like, the best advice I can give anybody is don't burn bridges. You never know where your career is going to go. You never know. Like, you may think it's the most amazing opportunity, and make sure that you give your current employer the respect of giving them that 2-week notice, because that's probably my biggest pet peeve, and it's been so rampant. And I know a lot of people have been dealing with it, is those that walk in, throw everything and say, I'm done, bye, or they don't give any notice or anything like that. The relationship's a two-way street, right? And you don't want to burn any bridges. Even if you absolutely hated the company, don't burn bridges. You never know what it is that may lead you back there to some point, and you don't want to lose out on a major opportunity for you in your career because you just didn't follow the proper procedures. And there's a lot of companies out there that if you don't give a 2-week notice, they mark it down as job abandonment, or they mark it down as not rehireable because you didn't give the proper notice. So always try to leave with your reputation intact, because that way, if you choose to go back and like the person that you didn't agree with left, or something changed and you were like, oh, that sounds amazing, yes, and you want to get back there, when you go and they ask those questions of, hey, so and so is applying to come back, all they have is just nothing but positives to say about you and your name and the good job that you did and the initiative that you took. Your reputation is everything. So keep it stellar.
Yeah.
Even in the hard times, if you're really that miserable and you really don't like it there, go find something that makes you happy, but still make sure that you are giving that respect, that you're working, the best of your ability, that you're building that reputation for yourself. So if you do choose to come back at a later date, it's a no-brainer. They see your name and they're like, oh, yes, absolutely, we need to bring them back for sure.
Yeah. Phil, what would you add? What advice for someone trying to boomerang back to a company?
Respect the recruitment process. Even though you might have a contact, a high level contact in the company, someone that could pull some strings for you, still respect the process. Obviously networking is always important, and getting people to help your application along never really hurt. But if you're there thinking that, oh, I was an employee there, they're just going to rehire me, I don't have to go through any process.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake. Be humble, go through the process, work your network, but go through each interview, take them seriously, prepare like you would for any new job, and just be sort of ready to do the work and do the hard work, even getting back into the company.
Yeah. Sam, final thoughts on this topic?
Communicate, and communicate really clearly and succinctly. An example of that is a partner company of ours. One of the pivotal members of staff was poached by a competitor, and before the first interview, he sat down with the founders and said, this is what's happening. I really want to go for this interview because I think it's a great opportunity and I love where I am today. He went to the organization. It didn't work out, and he's now back to where he came from. The point is, he really communicated well. He got their blessing before he left, in terms of, yes, it's great for you. We wish you well, and the door's always open. He kept that door open. I think it's a great example that we're all human, right? So talk.
Yeah. That's great. I hopefully a little bit of this can help somebody if they feel like they're in a weird work situation and want to return. So appreciate you guys sharing. That was our last big topic. So now we're just going to give each of you that last mic drop moment to share in a sentence or two. Final piece of advice for an HR professional. They just got that Boomerang employees application through. What's your final wisdom for them on that journey? And Phil, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Sam, and we'll close with Heather.
Trust your gut. If it smells bad, it probably is bad. This is a situation where after 3 days, fish begins to smell bad. It could really be that kind of scenario. So trust your gut.
Jessica, nice. Sam.
I was going to say what Phil said, but to add, you're not doing anything new here. Boomerang employees have been around for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. We've just now put a label to it.
Yeah, good point. Heather, last thought to you.
Really think about it. You remember, hiring someone back is a risk for both sides. Whether you're trying to get hired back or you're bringing someone back, there's always a risk. There's always that what if and those concerns. So really think about it before you get too far into the process, and then make sure you're stressing that communication. Address the concerns right in the interview process, because you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste their time. regardless of what side of the fence you sit on.
Amazing. Thank you so much, you three. This has been an awesome conversation. For those who are listening, watching, whatever you're doing, if you want to learn a little bit more about Boomerang employees, we have HR Encyclopedia entry on it, and we have entries on a handful of other potential people that you'll see in your ATS or who are applying. This video will actually be posted at the top of this entry, and I cannot stress enough, go connect with these three people on LinkedIn. They're posting cool stuff. They're liking cool stuff. I'm sure you could talk to them in messages sometimes and they'll help you. They do consulting too, and they can help your business. They're really three great people that we're just glad we could snag for a few minutes today. So appreciate all the listeners and appreciate you three. We hope everyone has an amazing rest of their days. See you guys.